Thank you so much, Abby. Hi, all, and welcome to today's virtual roundtable, and thank you so much for joining us for the Becker's virtual annual meeting. Like Abby said, I'm Mackenzie Bean, Managing Editor at Becker's, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. We're so thrilled to have such a great group join us to explore how healthcare organizations are driving systemness and streamlining patient flow through real-time operations. Before we get started, I'm just going to run through a few quick housekeeping notes. If you haven't already, please change your name to your name and organization so we know where folks are from. You can do this by opening the participants button at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over your name, you'll be able to select more and then rename. We also highly encourage everyone to use your video. If you haven't already, you can turn your video on by clicking Start Video button at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. To help manage the wonderful size of the group today, we'll be using the chat function to communicate throughout the discussion. If you want to go ahead and pull up the chat now, it's located right at the bottom of your screen. We'll also ask participants to please keep themselves on mute just to help avoid any background noise. If you do have a question or a comment, you are more than welcome to use the chat function or take yourself off mute. Lastly, if you experience any technical issues with your internet or your video, there is a dial-in number you can use that is located at the top of your chat. With that, I'd love to kick things off by introducing today's speakers. Dr. Craig Albanese is the Group Senior Vice President and Chief Medical Officer at NewYork-Presbyterian. In this role, he's responsible for overseeing enterprise clinical integration, service lines, the care team office, medical affairs, and more. Dr. Albanese previously spent 5 years as the Group Senior Vice President and Chief Operations Officer for NewYork-Presbyterian's Morgan Stanley Children's Hospital and the Sloan Hospital for Women. In addition, the last 3 years, he served as NYP's Chief Clinical Integration Officer. Dr. Albanese is an expert in management and improvement science and operations and published a best-selling book on improvement science in healthcare entitled Advanced Lean in Healthcare. Also joining us is Debbie Gash, who is the Senior Vice President and Chief Digital Officer for St. Luke's Health System. In this role, Debbie leads a broad range of digital initiatives and solutions across the system, including developing and implementing IT strategies and fostering a digital culture. Debbie has been with St. Luke's since 1992, where she was first responsible for physician services for St. Luke's Medical Group and served as project manager and director of application development and information services. Before joining St. Luke's, she also served as a healthcare consultant with Bard, Kurtz & Dobson CPA in Kansas City. Last but not least, joining us is Moody Garg, who is the CEO and co-founder of Juventus. If you're not familiar, the Juventus platform uses machine learning and behavioral science to automate patient flow and transform operations for health systems across the country, including academic, community, and safety net hospitals. Prior to Juventus, Moody co-founded multiple technology companies, including Vidopia and Hive. He also spent time in McKinsey & Company's healthcare practice, helping large providers with organizational transformation and performance improvement. Moody, Debbie, Dr. Albanese, thank you all so much for joining us today. We are so pleased to have you. As you'll see on our next slide, we also have a very exciting agenda lined up for you today. First, we'll hear from each of the speakers on how their respective organizations are addressing operational challenges and opportunities in regards to systemness and patient flow. We'll then segue to our panel fireside chat to explore the key themes of this session in more detail. And finally, we'll save the last 5 to 10 minutes for participant Q&A at the end. So please feel free to submit any questions you have for our presenters today by typing them into the chat box. So without further ado, let's turn to our speakers. Moody, I'll hand things over to you.
Thanks, Mackenzie. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be back at the Becker's annual event, even though it's virtually. And I'm really glad that all of you could join us today. And I look forward to the discussion together we're going to have today. I thought I would start with just a quick overview of us and the market problem I set out to address when I started Juventus. Maybe just starting with us, as Mackenzie was sharing, we are a strategic partner for leading health systems like NYP and St. Luke's in pursuing operational transformation. And we do that by enabling real-time operations. We take technologies like AI, machine learning, behavior science, and combine them with deep expertise in clinical operations and performance improvement and apply that to reliably improving the clinical operations of our customers. We're a proven partner with about over 120 deployments, and they range from community hospitals, academic medical centers, large health systems to safety net hospitals. If I think the starting of the thesis of the company came from the realization, as I worked in health systems, that the bottom line is we have an industry today around delivering care, but it's built on heroics and cheerleading. And I truly came to believe that we couldn't deliver world-class healthcare without changing that and building in a fabric of world-class operations. The cost of lack of good operational reliability around delivery of care is, of course, manifold, right? And the data bears this out. Like, for as an example, if you just look at the problem of patients spending unnecessary time in a hospital, i.e. staying in a hospital past when it's clinically necessary, that's, of course, the last thing a patient or a family member wants, but it's also extremely costly. According to the advisory board, about 22% of hospital days are excess days, which is about a full day per patient, right? If you think of an average typical 300-bed facility, that's about $17 million of cost that is going towards unneeded care, or $36 billion of waste across the country, which is resources we can solely apply to many, many other needs and areas. And of course, this is happening at a time of significant financial pressures, both short-term and long-term, and that have been magnified by the pandemic. Most importantly, these operational challenges, yes, they're financially important. Yes, they annoy the patient and are bad for quality, but they also, the last minute fires caused by these inefficient operations, further tax our doctors, our nurses, our caregiving staff that are already experiencing unprecedented burnout. So that's sort of the thesis of how do we help change this equation. And as we look at this specific problem, for example, of reducing the unnecessary time spent in the hospital, you can see that in spite of significant investments, IT and consulting over the last 20, 25 years, we have not been able to change the equation meaningfully. Why is that? Like, what's holding us back? And if you look at the current state of our operations, it's built upon systems of record. And as I was sharing before, it's reliant upon heroics and cheerleading from our staff to work through all of those things manually and figure out what's going on. So what does that mean? First, identifying problems, the analysis and decision of that is manual. Care teams need to look through lists of orders and figure out, based on experience, what's a problem, what's critical, when a patient might go home, where might they go. Once they figure out something's critical, the follow-up is manual. You got to pick up the phone, call the lab, call the X-ray tech, text message. One of our partners identified 279 manual steps that a care team has to track and manage for a patient to be discharged, for example. And from a management and leadership standpoint, that is manual as well, relying on leaders to do the best they can without any support on how to coach the teams. And all of these manual, as a result of these manual efforts, the processes underlying how we provide care ends up being highly variable across individuals, units, facilities. You know, one of our partners described these processes as paving. We've paved over the cow paths by digitizing much of our systems of record, but not really redesigning what lied underneath it. So contrast that with what can be, what we describe as a real-time healthcare system, whereby we are able to adapt immediately and are able to understand what is happening automatically. The reason is that there is technology watching the team's back, which is identifying operational issues like surges in demand or discharge barriers. We are helping orchestrate the actions of what needs to take place, to help collaborate with others, to automate steps along the way, and helping to manage accountability, to give managers the tools they need to address issues before they become big, to provide kudos to deserving teams, to create that desire and belief that we are going to do things reliably and consistently. For doing so, along with these technical capabilities, it's important to have hardwired best practices processes. So instead of paving the cow paths, as we were talking about, what are the evidence-based, research-driven processes that allow you to utilize these new capabilities? And that's what's possible today. And that's what I'm excited to hear, both from Craig's experience and Deb's experience. But I think that's what's possible today, and that's what we endeavor to provide. That sort of view of wanting the world to provide world-class operations through real-time health system isn't just our view, it's a shared industry perspective. Gartner has described this kind of a real-time health system as one being, first of all, aware, able to understand what's happening across the board. That's the most basic sort of building block that needs to exist. Second, collaborative. We know that care is not provided by an individual, but by a team. It has to be smart. It has to be able to learn, and it has to be real time. It has to be able to understand, using artificial intelligence and machine learning, how to optimize and orchestrate the right workflows. That's what it takes to design a system that is able to adapt itself to what's happening on the ground. We have built a system with that in mind that addresses operational transformation towards real-time operations. The foundation is similar, an automation platform that integrates with your EHR and enables you to manage operations as that closed loop system. Similarly, first using AI and machine learning to identify operational issues like bottlenecks and flow, both in real time and ahead of when they're happening, orchestrating actions through behavior science of how to make the right thing to do, the easy thing to do, and finally, statistical tools to manage accountability for leaders so they can scale their influence over larger and larger swaths of the teams. And that platform underlying is the core of the system. On top of that, we've developed best practice solutions in the areas of inpatient flow and excess stays, throughput in the ED, perioperative marketing of the perioperative time and capacity, and also managing cross-facility command center driven improvements. Along with that, with these best practice bundle of operational processes and management practices, we bring together teams that help establish the governance, the change management to operationalize the software. And these teams include both clinicians, project managers, technical specialists, because we know without that people, process, technology coming together and the actual business outcome that we are aiming for not coming through, it's not worth it. And that is super, super important for us. And we really pride ourselves on being that strategic partner and not just providing the technology to do so. So that's sort of a bit of a background and overview on us, the why behind it. With that introduction of us and Juventus, I'd like to turn it over to two of our health system partners who I'm super excited to have here today and allow them to share a few opening remarks about their organizations and how they've addressed operational challenges in their own health systems. First, I'd like to introduce Dr. Craig Albanese, who's been a partner of ours for a number of years, both at NewYork-Presbyterian and before. He and his team have been actually phenomenal close innovation partners with us, and we've been grateful of the expertise they've shared with us over the years. Craig, thank you so much for joining us today, and we'd love to hear a brief introduction from you.
Great, thank you so much, Moody. And I'm honored to join the Zoom stage with you and Debbie, and of course, thank you to our great friends at Becker's for the invitation and for hosting this wonderful webinar. Excuse me. Let me tell you a bit about NewYork-Presbyterian, but let me first start by saying that I firmly believe that healthcare is a technology industry, and the technology will assume a greater and greater role as we advance. From the EHR to telehealth to consumer-facing apps, remote patient monitoring, predictive analytics, and AI and machine learning. It's here to stay, and I believe it's only going to make us better, more efficient, and will take a lot of the human fallibility out of care and allow people to work at their top of their license. So we've embraced that position in NewYork-Presbyterian, and that's in part why we partnered with Juventus to solve one of our problems. I'll talk about that problem in a second, but getting back to NYP, integrated academic health system, 10 hospitals, an ambulatory care network, and 2 medical schools. We're peppered throughout the New York metropolitan area, have 3,300 beds, 7,500 affiliated physicians, and 47,000 employees. It's a large, complex organization, both urban and we have some in community settings. And of course, we're very focused on optimizing our operations and flow across the system. Patient flow is a big issue for us. We routinely operate at about 95% census or greater. And we're of the mindset, as I'm sure all of you on this call are, no patients should spend 1 extra minute in the hospital when they're both socially and medically ready for discharge. All right, you can't get a medication error, a pressure ulcer, or some nosocomial infection if you're not in the hospital. A hospital is not the best place for continued healing, and so we not only because of cost issues, not only because of demand, it's just simply the right thing to do. However, with 10 campuses, we wanted to move from initially a holding company to an integrated system, and that's what we've been doing over years. And to do that, part of that aspect of systemness is standardizing operational procedures and getting economies of scale and best practices across the network. Let me pause there and just say I didn't put this graphic up, but picture a Venn diagram of 3 things coming together. Our system strategy is the following: standardization, which means getting rid of variability, virtualizing, again, embracing this technology in this sector, regionalizing amongst our campuses and the greater New York area. And then when those 3 bubbles come together in the middle is engaging our workforce. And that's sort of our strategy and how we think about ourselves as a system. So let me tell you now how we embarked on this journey to improve patient flow and systemness. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so let me start by saying we have a daily management system. It's something that I learned about from various industries, be it nuclear, aviation, and most notably at Toyota. I spent some time in Japan and Georgetown, Kentucky. We put together a system. It's principally an analog system. But it's pretty good. It gets at what aviation does, but only in points in time, right? So you get together. We have a tiered system of huddles that allows us to look back. How did we do yesterday with our plan, and what's our plan for today? And it revolves around the acronym MESS, right? Methods, which is flow, equipment, environment, staff, and supplies. So are we ready for the day? And we also link to that system. We have goal boards everywhere for our annual goals, and those are replete with principally process measures that help us attain the outcomes that we want to work on the things that are problematic, like collapses and CAUTIs and those sorts of things. And then every leader is trained in root cause problem solving, and the leaders also have standard work that connects them to the frontline teams, and of course the problems and also the identification of solutions are both top down and bottom up in a system like this. When I first got to NewYork-Presbyterian from Stanford 5 years ago, we just started establishing interdisciplinary rounds. Many of our patients are quite complex and have a lot of needs, long lengths of stay. And we wanted to streamline to the best of our ability and drive waste out of the system. There was no standard for discharge planning. Every team, every unit, every month, depending on the team, had some different twist. And every campus or hospital of the 10 had some different way of doing it. The other issue we were faced is we're principally discharging people after 2 p.m. Now think about that. If you're at 95% census, all the ORs are running, the ED sees several 100,000 people a year, throughout the system. We're constipating the system ourselves. If we can't get people out before 2, the ORs back up, the ICUs back up, the ED backs up, transfers in back up. And so that was another big problem. So in this relatively reactive analog system, point in time tiered huddle system, our care teams would get together. It was standardized, make no mistake about that, but the discharge process wasn't. But they'd get together to discuss discharge plans and barriers. They'd be pulling out notes. They'd be emailing each other, calling each other, scouring through tons of VHR notes. And this is one of a photo at Weill Cornell, one of our hospitals, of the team doing their best with their computers on wheels and pieces of paper. It challenged us in a lot of ways that you can imagine, and I'd be surprised if some of you don't have the same challenges, right? So it's a single point in time, Kodak moment. A lot happens before, a lot happens after. That's the beauty of something like air traffic control, where they're looking at their data second to second, minute to minute. This was a point in time huddle, and then maybe we huddle again to change a shift at 7 p.m. and then once again at 10 p.m. So maybe 3 or 4 huddles a day, but that's it. There's basically 23 more hours in the day that are unaccounted for. It was difficult to standardize, as I mentioned before. There was a lot of manual documentation. In fact, there was a lot of overburden, and this was really driving it. So it's one thing to say, yeah, we want to get our patients through, but we can get our patients through faster, better, but we can do it on the backs of few, and we can do it with inefficient processes. And that just leads to burnout, high attrition rate, discontent with the teams, and people working at the bottom of the license. And that's exactly what they were doing. So this was as much a workforce issue as it was a patient issue. And we try to keep those in lockstep, because you can hire enough people to help with the discharge process. Well, that's not sustainable. Or you can just throw more and more work on the backs of those who are there, and that's not sustainable. And that's typically what a lot of us have done over the years in healthcare. So reducing the burden on the frontline team, real-time data, 24/7 is what we wanted. We thought that automating, we knew that automating some of these processes was the answer. We just knew it. We've embraced technology, and so we connected with Juventus. And let me show you a little bit now about what we first tackled with them. And let me say one thing. I am not a computer scientist. I'm not an expert. So all questions go to Moody about the technical aspects of this. And Moody, please just put your hand in the air and take them, because I'll talk about operations and some of the outcomes, but I don't have that deep machine learning knowledge. My machine is limited. So let's look at this next slide. So we deployed a 24/7 operation system that integrates people, process, technology, and aims to hardwire length of stay reductions and more seamless flow. And we put this really on the back of this thing called IDR, or interdisciplinary rounds, which is a way of getting a nurse manager, physician, pharmacist, social worker, care coordination together, but doing it in a smarter way. We want to work smarter, not harder. So what you're seeing in this first graphic, behind the small little square in the rectangle in the back, is the Juventus Pathfinder, which is a care progression manager. It drives, in this example, the IDR process for discharge planning. Again, IDR is interdisciplinary rounds. It's a visualization tool. It's integrated with our Epic EMR. We just went to Epic recently, and before that it was integrated with Allscripts. The AI in this.
Hi, this is Dr. Henry.
Yes, hi.
Hi, this is Bethany Daly calling.
Oh, hi.
How are you?
Hey, Bethany, can we have you put? All right, sorry, Craig, go ahead.
Oh, that's okay. So this AI automatically tees up the orders that are the greatest rate limiting steps to progressing care that the team needs to focus on at that time. But there's still humans in it. The team still uses judgment to accept or not the AI conditions that make sense for each patient. This is really important. This is not cookbook medicine. This is not robots taking over, but this is a better way of humans interacting with a very sophisticated technology. And that's how we're going to have higher and higher reliability in medicine. So as an example here, excuse me, the AI predicts barriers such as when a patient likely requires a physical therapy evaluation. The care teams can confirm barriers like that you see here in the graphic for physical therapy or PT. It can also comment on things like an MRI is ordered that holds up discharge, a lab is ordered, we need a phlebotomist. The machinations are endless. Next click, please. Okay, so now with the discharge plan and the barriers, that plan captured in the IDRs, the machine learning then helps coordinate to resolve those barriers. So the Juventus machine talks to our ancillary teams via mobile nudges like you're seeing in the smaller graphic in front of the Pathfinder in the middle, and prioritizes orders for discharge. And this is an example of where behavioral science is embedded in the technology, where we're nudging humans in in a non-offensive way to remind them that there's a potential barrier in a most timely fashion. Next graphic, please. And then finally, the Juventus platform helps detect and escalate when something is deviating from the discharge planning best practice. So this is an example of a nudge that our leaders receive on a patient who has been identified for discharge before noon. Remember, we said that's a big problem of ours, and we wanted at least 20 or 30% of our planned discharges before noon, out before noon. You don't want 100% because that just shuts down the whole place. Same way everybody going out at 2 p.m. or 4 p.m. shuts down pharmacy and other services. But in this example, a hypothetical example, patient's supposed to go by noon, but the intelligence picks up that there's no order in the system. So it enables our leadership to be more proactive in real time by giving them a nudge, by making sure they see that in the Pathfinder board and per nudges, and in those ways resolve in the most timely fashion, or change the plan. So together, these solutions help us identify and resolve the barriers upstream, and it's now starting to help us think about how to standardize these processes across our hospitals and units and teams, because it is less dependent on the whim of the particular team and is more dependent on a standard platform that meets the needs of the teams and the patients. Let's go to the last slide, please. So we'll show you just a few metrics here, and then I'll pass it over to Debbie. This work happened pre-pandemic. Also during the pandemic, it helped us. And it also helped us during the transition from Allscripts to Epic. First, we unlocked significant capacity. Decreasing 0.5 days, a half day, is huge. It is absolutely huge. It's huge for us in that it functionally gave us a new unit. We were actually thinking of converting an area of the hospital, of one of our hospitals, to another unit, a 30+ bed unit. Don't need it. We have 35 functional beds that have been freed up by this decreased length of stay. And then obviously there are a whole host of issues that go along with decreasing length of stay by 0.5 days, which are fabulous. What's not on the graphic here is our pre-noon discharges are up to about 30% in select areas, which is fabulous. So now we're more level loading our discharges throughout the day, whereas before we just created a very unlevel system that basically shut down the hospital for several hours. Most importantly, patients benefit, does the staff benefit, right? So our providers have more time at the bedside and they're working at the top of their license. There's less of this manual coordination, back and forth phone calls, emails, sidewalk conversations, sifting through notes. And for the teams writ large and the organization, is obviously greater standardization. And again, a guiding principle is control the controllable. So once we do that, then the healthcare system can accept the chaos, right? And I posit that about 80% of operations can be controlled, and only about 20% of healthcare is truly unpredictable and chaotic. We feel different on a daily basis, and we would not necessarily attest to that, but I think that is a lot of self-imposed inefficiencies. So if we can control as much as possible, potentially by automating and streamlining our processes, we'll be better at accepting chaos and the non-predictable things that happen in healthcare. So I just want to close by, again, thanking our partners at Becker's for the opportunity to give a highlight. And our partnership, Moody, has been outstanding. We started at Stanford, and you're helping solve a major problem for a large, complex organization, and we're going to do more and more with this, and a lot to be proud of. But thanks so much, and let me pass it over to you, Mackenzie and Debbie. Thanks.
Thank you, Craig. Been super fortunate on our partnership. Likewise, feel incredibly blessed. I'd like to now introduce Deb Gash. She's the Senior Vice President, Chief Digital Officer at St. Luke's Health System. As a background, we partnered with St. Luke's, and Deb specifically right in the midst of the pandemic, which I'm sure Deb will tell you more about. We're very proud also with our partnership with them as a leading and highly respected, innovative health system. Deb, thank you so much for joining us today as well. I'll turn it over to you as well.
Thanks very much. I'm very glad to be here. St. Luke's is a integrated delivery network located in the heart of the United States here in Kansas City. We have hospitals and clinics both in Missouri and Kansas, and average, about 12,000 employees. We have just over 1,000 beds. So our hospitals range in size from micro hospitals, which we have 5 8-bed inpatient facilities anchored by an ED, as well as 4 critical access hospitals, and then a number of community and tertiary, quaternary academic medical center within our health system. Our challenge is very similar to what Craig relayed to you at New York Presbyterian. So I'm not going to replicate some of his comments, but in addition to, the throughput challenges in our very busy facilities, we also had a lot of underutilized facilities. So we had high bed demand, and we had some hospitals that had low census and others that were very high. So we had embarked on a throughput initiative a while back to manage our bed management, placement, staffing, et cetera, and created what we called a logistics center. And that really focused on leveraging our Epic infrastructure as much as possible that we could to help us improve throughput in all of our facilities. And we have been on an initiative to maximize all of the Epic functionality, but still had challenges with throughput. And so it was important for us to really focus on more advanced analytic capabilities to get us to that next step in our journey. This really became very critical for us during the COVID crisis. As all of you probably had the same experience, we had huge demand for inpatients, beds, and needed to be able to maximize and be as efficient as possible. So we really leveraged the relationship with Juventus to help us with the pandemic issues, and leverage their COVID capacity management dashboards to help us understand the COVID demand, where we had capacity, and help us with leveraging that insight to be able to manage forward thinking how we were going to keep all of the patients where they needed to be, take care of them, and deliver a high quality service to our customers. So if you want to go to the next slide, we've been embarked on, as I said, a very similar journey. We want to drive those system-wide efficiencies. We want to improve our predictive capabilities, accommodate that new demand for care, and reduce excess days, remove the friction and inefficiencies, and to optimize our surgical volumes. We've been using the throughput dashboards for our inpatient units for, I guess, since March of this year. And to date, in using the barrier management and the inpatient throughput dashboard, we've already saved over 1,200 patient days, and that equates to over $500,000 in savings. And we've already identified a number of systemic types of barriers that have allowed our leadership to really rethink how we're doing things in all of our hospitals and make improvements. So it's been very impactful in just a very short period of time. So we're very excited about that ability to really use those predictive models and the behavioral insights that we're gaining from Juventus to help us to improve and achieve these goals and overcome these challenges. So I'll stop there and turn it back to to you guys, Mackenzie. This is an example of our end state. We started with the COVID-19. We have implemented our throughput dashboards with Juventus. We are focused on establishing what we're calling a command center, which will be an enterprise operation for our organization. And we've also focused on leveraging Juventus to really look at how we're planning operative procedures, and we're using their perioperative predictive models to help us in identifying when we might have unutilized blocks in surgical time and be able to proactively alert the proceduralist that there might be an opportunity for them to fill an unused block in advance of, at least the 2-week period of time that it takes to really try to get people scheduled. And we've seen some very positive results from just that. We've seen at least one additional case being added to our surgery schedule per day using the perioperative predictive model that we've been using with Juventus. So overall, it's really been very helpful for us in accomplishing these goals.
Wonderful. Well, I so appreciate you all sharing that additional background. I think it's a very helpful context for the next part of our session. With that set up now, I'd love to first explore why NYP and St. Luke's are excuse me, sorry, I had a little technology glitch there. Let me restart that. I'd like to explore why NYP and St. Luke's have prioritized addressing their operations to drive systemness and patient flow. So Deb, can you first tell us about St. Luke's journey? Why did you embark on this work, even in the midst of COVID?
Well, I think at the end of the day, we're trying to really drive value for the payers, for our patients, and really be as efficient as possible in trying to reduce the cost of care. So that's a real important lever, and our organization strategically believes in order to do that, we have to have better insights into our operations, more real-time information for our operational leaders so they can react and take initiatives and steps they need to drive that value. I mentioned we have our logistics center. We've maximized what we could do with Epic, but in order to go further, we really felt like the advanced analytics, machine learning, the predictive algorithms, and incorporating that behavioral health component was what was going to take us to the next step beyond where we had already kind of plateaued. So that was really key for us. So I'll turn it over to Craig and allow him to chime in there if that's
perfect. Yeah, Craig, I'd love for you to tell us also more about NYP's journey with real-time operations. Where did you start with tiered huddles, and why did you really see the need to incorporate intelligence into your systems?
Thanks, Mackenzie. The tiered huddle system is it's a social system, but it's a point in time. It has a role. Even with Juventus and AI, we haven't gotten rid of the tiered huddles because it gets people together, gets people talking, people seeing how we performed yesterday. What are the barriers, at least at one point in time today? But then it takes a step further. It was the best we knew how at the time. And again, learning from other industries, it was clear that this point in time for a 24/7 industry like healthcare was inadequate. It serves a purpose, but there's a lot of gaps to be filled in the beginning. And this was just part of a journey, from getting a single instance of Epic to telehealth to robotic process automation. We put that in the back end, since our insurance companies can do several hundred denials an hour and we could do 11 by hand. We embraced that, and this is just part of the journey. But once we became clear about our gaps and how we defined systemness, it was just clear that knocking out variability and standardizing in daily operations was key, and that we were never going to progress if we were struggling to get patients in and out when we were at such high census.
I would like to add a point though, and one of the key aha moments for us in our journey was when talking to our ancillary units. So PT, OT, radiology, all of those folks would get a work list every day of things that they needed to accomplish on the inpatients in order to get through all the physician, orders of what that patient needed to have done in order to get to the point where they can discharge. That work list that they get in the EHR is just kind of a first in, first out. There's no way of knowing, well, gosh, if I do this one, that person's going to hit their discharge date, where if I do this one, it might delay somebody else from there. With the Pathfinder dashboards that you get in Juventus, they're ranked and prioritized. So the ancillary units love those Pathfinder dashboards because it tells them the order in which they ought to do their work. And they're meeting then those discharge goals that the physicians have set and the care progression folks have set for those patients. And so we're getting patients out the door sooner. They're getting their things accomplished sooner based on the fact that, gosh, if you do this patient first, they're going to be able to be discharged on time. And that's an important differentiator from what we had prior to Juventus.
Yeah, I think Mackenzie, Debbie brings up a very good point. Key to this, or key to a lot of improvement efforts, is not only measuring what's important, but making it visible, making it available and visible and easily available and visible, not 5 clicks, 6 clicks, not EMR. And so having these Pathfinder boards strategically placed at the ready for the teams as well as for leadership is, I think, decreases that barrier to understanding the real-time information. So you can have real-time information as an EHR has, but you have to get into it. You have to click in, you have to look. These are right there, they're up for display, and it's a wonderful concept that I think really does help.
Absolutely. I know you've all alluded to the need for new capabilities that complement the EHR. How does real-time operations work with and maximize the value from the EHR? And maybe Moody, we can start with you on this one.
Yeah, I mean, look, the EHR is fundamental to the success of real-time operations. And as Craig was just saying, it allows us to have a digitized data about what's happening to the patient. So without that, of course, real-time operations would be very, very hard to do. But the challenge is, how do you build an organizational habit of acting upon that when it takes so much effort to scour through it, draw conclusions from it, and to follow up to make sure that action is taken? And that's sort of what we hear across our health system partners, that most have used combination of BI projects and existing data from the EHR, but still felt like more was needed. Teams are inundated with the data. In the example Deb was giving, we see that care teams are manually trying to navigate each record, manually project and enter EDDs, and think about where the dispositions will be, where the patient will go, sort through the open orders, try to figure out which one will be barriers, which one is important, then call up PT and say, hey, this one is important, make sure you get to it, and then follow up on that. That's when you typically have in a day 30 to 45 seconds while rounding on a per patient basis to do those prioritizations. And we've done that retrospective study of hundreds of thousands of patients, and we know that when this plan can exist early, if you can help the teams put in place that plan early of having a discharge date, having sort of where they'll go, resolving barriers, excess days reduced by 90%. So we leverage the data from the EHR, create this personalized EDD post-acute plan, double the patients having an early discharge plan, improve the accuracy of that plan by 3x. And that's the kind of stuff that allows that real-time adaptation to happen. It allows the ancillary to know that their work is in the right order, and sort of enhances the value of all the efforts that our care teams are doing and putting the data into the EHR by actually making sure that that is driving insights that can actually help drive the reliability of the operations overall.
Great, thank you for weighing in there. I appreciate it, Moody. And I know you each spoke to some of the metrics you have been focused on earlier, but what other impact are you seeing around systemness and flow, whether quantitatively or qualitatively from your teams. Deb, I know your results are early, but what are you seeing?
Well, we've seen a reduction in length of stay, similar to what Craig had shared. It's about a half a day for those patients who have an early disposition date entered on their plan for care. But I think one of the most important things that was highlighted that we didn't really count on was the reduction in the number of interruptions that our physicians had throughout the day. So prior to implementing the multidisciplinary rounding process and really standardizing using the barrier reduction process, our physicians would get messages throughout the day asking questions, and various resources, nurses, care progression folks, all asking them questions about things related to getting the patients discharged. And once we implemented the multidisciplinary rounding, started standardizing, getting the Pathfinder dashboards, we've seen a significant reduction in the number of messages going to those physicians throughout the day. So they're very pleased with that. That helps them stay focused, keep their work moving. They're not getting all of those interruptions throughout the day. Now, our physicians were concerned about that. They're like, this is just going to be another thing that I have to do. It's not going to help me throughout our day, but they've been very pleased with the reduction in the interruptions throughout the day.
That's great to hear. And Moody, how does this compare with what you're seeing across other health system partners?
Yeah, I think that the impact NYP in St. Luke's is similar to what we see across our health systems partners. Really meaningful results. We've seen, I think we added up about 80 years plus worth of excess time that the patients would have spent in the hospital eliminated across our partners, which is just, every time I think about that, it's both sort of mind-blowing, but also really exciting that we can take that much unnecessary time. And as we shared sort of that evidence of early and accurate plans helping, but we've seen that every time we are doing these closed loop systems with the right process and operationalizations, we are seeing those results. Like, for example, another system in mHealth Fairview in Minnesota, we've seen a 0.5 to 1 day reduction, 5 to 7x increase in morning discharges. Another system, Honor Health in Phoenix, Arizona, similarly a 55% reduction in excess days per patient, even during COVID-19. And they'll talk about how they've never had to transfer a patient throughout the pandemic because of these streamlined operations and capacity. So I think this sort of the goal of, can we make it repeatable and reliable, is at the core of how we've designed our approach of both the technology and the packaging of solutions around it. And we are excited that we are being able to see that repeated across customers.
Mackenzie, can I make a comment on this topic? We're at an interesting nexus as technology assumes a greater and greater role. People are scared. People are scared for their jobs, right? Radiologists are wondering what their role is going to be. Go down the list, right? As well as support people. This technology has helped our folks. Number one, it's taught the organization around the value in standardization, but it's helping them embrace technology because they're seeing that they're not being replaced, they're being augmented, right. They're being complemented, and it's freeing them up to do the higher level thinking, the judgment that you can't read about in the textbook, right? The judgment and experience things that you need to be a caregiver. And it also frees them up to opine on rare events. Much like, the checklist in the cockpit frees up the pilot to think about weather and this and that, not whether or not there is oil pressure, right? But this is going to be an interesting tension as time goes on. Undoubtedly, some jobs will be lost, right? Back-end jobs. I'm not talking about Juventus now, but robotic process automation. Do we need 50 people do insurance auths now or denials? So we've started NYP University, and now we've created like a trade school within our organization to try to upskill some of people who might be displaced from technology, because we don't want to lay anyone off. But that's the beauty in this. It really has taught us about standardization. It's helped us understand how technology can augment clinical care, not necessarily replace it. And then all the other things that Debbie and Moody talked about, I think we've seen also. we haven't quantified a lot of it, but qualitatively, all you need to do is walk the halls and ask the folks who are interacting with it, and they'll tell you the same things.
Yeah, I think it's a great point to add, and it's clear that technology is a big piece of the puzzle, but at the same time, more than just technology is needed to really drive this change. So Debbie and Craig, I'd love to hear from you both. How did you approach change management, and what was required from a leadership perspective? Debbie, maybe we can start with you.
Yeah, we did an actual focused process improvement initiative around multidisciplinary rounding before we launched our Juventus hospital throughput analytics. So we actually sat down with all of the clinical team participants, the physicians, the nurses, the ancillary departments, et cetera. And we actually mapped out the current state and designed what we thought would be the desired state using the advice and the knowledge that Juventus brought to the table. And we launched that process at one of our hospitals and tweaked it a little bit and then took it to the next facility. So that was really more of a process redesign effort, and that was the biggest change effort. Certainly people need to be trained, and you have to educate, and you have to communicate the why and what's in it for me. But I think we took the time to really focus on that and really incorporate all of those three pillars of deploying new technology: the people, the process, and the technology, and bring it together. And all of our key leaders in nursing operations, physicians, the different ancillary departments were all part of that executive sponsorship team for that effort.
We did everything Debbie said, probably not as well, but we did it. Also, we found a coalition of the willing, and we had, as a hospital goal, and every campus or every hospital had a length of stay goal. We went to the place that was struggling the most and motivated, and we took a bite-sized chunk of that campus and said, okay, in these areas with these people, we're not going to advertise it widely necessarily because we don't know, and we're gonna take it on. And then we started to spread from there. We have not gotten it throughout our 10 hospital system. So I want to be clear. We talk about an integrated system. We are on that path. We will get there, but we're in just a few of our hospitals and not every unit, but the gains have been tremendously. But, this was somewhat of an easy one, Mackenzie, because it was, people were struggling, period. We were just hitting one roadblock, and the amount of overburden was tremendous, and we just couldn't hire our way out of this, right? It was just not sustainable. And it was a clear goal. We had to do something different. And a bunch of people put their hand in the air, and it's been wonderful.
Great, thanks for weighing in there, Craig. And Moody, how has the need for change management support shaped Juventus's approach? I'd love to hear your perspective as well.
Yeah, maybe just really briefly, I think Craig and Deb hit on really important points there. I think I'd say that when we started out the business, we set out to bring world-class capabilities to form a real-time health systems, that can adapt to the changing conditions, the needs of the patients. But as they were just alluding to, we quickly saw that it was very important to help leaders and staff have the right processes, the right management practices to bring that to bear. So we design evidence-based driven processes. We have a world-class team of expert services with clinicians, process improvement experts to help co-design that right real-time health system, to make sure that the technology piece is well supported by our management practices, how the processes are running on a day-to-day basis. So that is a core part of our belief system and a core part of how we deliver now.
Wonderful. Well, I know we're nearing the end of our session. Time has gone by so quickly, but I'd love to hear from you all one last time. What's your quick take on the future and where this can all go? Moody, would you like to start?
Sure. I think look, we talked about probably one problem in detail today, which is patients staying past the necessary time in the hospital. That was $36 billion of waste and operational inefficiencies. And you just think about that, and there's just so much more opportunity on the horizon. We work with health systems, and they have continued to see an expanded focus, especially if you think about historically, we've managed the processes around delivery of care through touch and feel, right? And through the pandemic and through trends that both Deb and Craig were referring to, health systems are both centralizing and virtualizing. And in the world of centralization and in the world of virtualization, that touch and feel is more limited. You don't have that direct touch and feel. So how do you make the best decisions? How do you make the right orchestrations happen becomes even more important. And of course, along with those trends, the things that we're talking about in managing in a unit, you need to now manage across a facility, across multiple facilities, across the home. So the same concepts that I was describing are applying to many, many, many more things. And I'm firmly believing that whether it's about how a patient in the future accesses care, the flow of their care, the resources that are needed to be providing that care, all of those are multiplicatively increasing the dimensions and the variables that need to be managed as we virtualize and centralize. So there's a tremendous role to be played, broadly speaking, by this kind of real-time health system approach across the delivery of care.
Deb, what are your thoughts on this one?
Oh, I really think that this kind of capability would lend itself well to certain demand and capacity management issues related to managing populations. So I'm hopeful that we will be able to leverage this kind of capability outside of the four walls of the hospital. Would love to be able to use it in ambulatory operations, as a way to manage throughput in our clinics. We have high demand for certain subspecialties. There's just so much opportunity, I think, for this kind of technology to really be leveraged across the continuum of care. So I'm looking and exploring and pushing Juventus to look in these different areas as well. The focus in the perioperative space is new and it's proven very interesting. And I think there are other opportunities there too.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have much to add with the final thought around the last thing we want to do is to have technology increase healthcare disparities. And so hopefully as time goes on, Wi-Fi will become a right, not just a privilege. And AI is created by humans. Humans are replete with implicit bias. And so I know Moody and his team are very sensitive to that. And we have to be careful as an industry to make sure we acknowledge that and we put guardrails against that. I think cybersecurity is really important. So this stuff has to be very safe. The software has to be safe and meet standards because, cyber attacks are on the rise and threaten our employees as well as our patients' privacy. And then finally, my hope is that we can reach more people, as Debbie said, across the continuum. And then for those integrated networks, we need to decrease costs. We need to centralize things. We need to have air traffic control, mission control, whatever you want to call it. What aviation, what nuclear, what NASA does, what Uber does with data, and apply that to healthcare and healthcare operations across the care continuum, inpatient, outpatient, EICU, telehealth, you name it. And we need to get into all communities, rural, urban, suburban, regardless of whether people have two nickels to rub together or whatever. And so I think the future is really bright for this, but we have to go in eyes wide open and make sure we have the appropriate guardrails to protect each other and our consumers, so to speak.
Absolutely. And I think those are all great insights to end on. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we will wrap up here. And I know Juventus is happy to take any other attendee questions that follow offline. So Craig, Debbie, Moody, I just want to say thank you again for all of your thoughtful remarks and discussion today. We so appreciate it. And thank you to our attendees for your participation as well. We hope everyone has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you. Thanks all. Thanks, Mackenzie.